Okay, welcome everybody to the uh, video lecture for week 7 on Islam. So this is titled Islam, Religion of Belief, Action, and Taqwa. So this term Taqwa is actually, I believe, new should be new to everybody. And I include it just because I really do feel that this is it's a virtue and a characteristic that Muslims will. It's characteristic of many pious Muslims, and so the word itself means something like piety, something like it means multiple things, but piety, awareness of God, sort of like a God fearingness. You could say that fearingness isn't quite right, but in the Old Testament or Hebrew scriptures, there's a I think it's in the Psalms. There's a verse that says that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and that fear of the Lord, it can mean as awe, like a sense of it invoking awe as much as fear. So it's kind of like that. And then there's also the notion of the Day of Judgment, which is known as in Islamic tradition, Yom Adin, the Day of Judgment. Deen is like and judgment, and then it can also be Yom al Qiyamah, another term for this, a day, and then where one is judged, and then. So anyway, this is we're gonna get. I want to go back to Taqwa and share a quote on it, and it's kind of a theme of this lecture, you might say. And then yeah, it's kind of I understand a little bit of a weird title. You're probably thinking, and I include religion of belief, action and action. I mean that can apply to virtually any religious tradition, you might argue. But I just include this because it kind of hovers on the fence, where belief is extremely important within to Muslims, and we see that in the one of the pillars, the Shahada, a creedal, testimony of faith, but just the certain way of believing about God, keeping God in mind, and then praying each day to God, five times a day as obligatory prayer. And then the action, but it's also one is judged on one's actions. And again, like I just said, that these pillars all require actions to be taken, and like during Ramadan fasting, and during again each day doing the prayers, undertaking this Hajj pilgrimage that you see this picture of, and so this is in Mecca. In this mosque in Mecca, and you see all the pilgrims blurred because they're actually moving when this is taken, and they're doing these circumambulations around that shrine called the Kaaba. And so according to Islamic tradition, this was originally built by Abraham and Ishmael when they had come down. This period of time, according to Islamic tradition, they had come down, and after Abraham had Isaac with Sarah, and then with Hagar, he had with Ishmael, and they built. This is part of the tradition that they had come down here and built this shrine together, and then so that's something that those. Who are every Muslim who is financially and physically able to go on Hajj. That's a requirement once in one's lifetime. And then in this, just in this bottom left, we see this Sheikh Zayed mosque in Abu Dhabi, and I'm going to show you an enlarged picture of it because it's just you can't really understand the magnitude of it until you see this the kind of a blown up expanded photo. So I will show that later, and I'm going to start this slide by showing a few images of mosques, and then so yeah, I didn't mention it, but this is similar to the previous lectures. I'm going to reinforce certain concepts that were brought up in Fisher and the other readings. mention a couple of things from the Approaching the Quran reading that we had, the introduction there. Um, Touch upon also, especially the notion of jihad that's addressed in What a Billion Muslims Really Think, which is just inside Islam, What a Billion Muslims Really Think, was just such a fantastic documentary there. And so, but I think everyone, I would imagine, would have enjoyed and benefited that. So yeah, I'm going to be reinforcing that, but then adding some supplemental points as we go along here that may be new as well. So hope this is beneficial, and let's get into it. Okay, so this first mosque you see here, and you see this is in Istanbul, Turkey, and Sultan Ahmed Ahmed Mosque. So again, you have like the guttural there on the pronunciation, and it's just absolutely stunning, beautiful. As you see the incredible symmetry of this incredible, huge mosque, and you have the so picturesque with the azure and the blue azure in the background of the Mediterranean Sea, and just want think about like what is the you see these images of mosque, and what does it kind of evoke? What does it kind of tell you about the religion of Islam? I think that can be a really important thing to consider about what does the architecture of the sacred sites of any given tradition suggest about the characteristics of the faith of that tradition, or what its ideals or values are, or its overall theology. What does it say about God and human relationship? And here we see, it's just incredibly awe-inspiring, and you have this, the minarets are just towering, each of the towers on each side of the building, and then you see those domes, and it's just, it's like it seems like there's this divine intelligence or splendor behind the architecture here. It's just, being, of course, it's a colossal human achievement, but it's also just it really suggests that this that there's this that the creation of the world and the world has this greater creator behind it, and it's the world has this kind of grand authorship, you might say, and so that's just you see that kind of suggested here, and it kind of sets the tone for prayers that one might be going to this mosque or other mosque and see this mosque in the city of Istanbul. And this, by the way, in Turkey used to be called the city of Constantinople. So it was a site of the Orthodox Church for a while, the center of the Orthodox Church for quite some time. But today is Istanbul. Turkey is predominantly a Muslim nation. Okay, and then this next one, the Prophet's Mosque in Medina, Saudi Arabia. And so this is where the Prophet, his tomb is here, and this is where he spent a great deal of his life and where Islam was really established. So even though he was born in Mecca, in south of here in Saudi Arabia, this is where the early Muslim community began to flourish, and then it set up an empire, and then it was all according to God's word for and instructions for the Muslims to live according to Sharia, the law, God's law or vision for humanity, on how to treat one another and how to pray to God, everything. So here, I wanted to make the other point that you see already just how incredible these sites are. I mean, they're absolutely stunning, and just you can see that if you could really look close at this image, how tiny each individual is, like little specks or ants are the humans that are going around this mosque. And so I think it's kind of like maybe like a neo-colonial comment here, or of observation, that you see the Western media. We talk about media perceptions, and that Inside Islam, What a Billion Muslims Really Think documentary really gets into it in a profound way about how we misportray and seemingly intentionally for whatever our political concerns. Arguably that it that if it's to our the benefit of maybe the elites in our country, or to be able to paint a certain picture about Islamic societies, such that it would give the illusion of a right to rule, or a right to intervene militarily in these countries that may or may not, I would say probably may not be justified whatsoever. But here we see, and obviously we know the whole thing about oil interests and all of that. But that's an aside. But the point is that what I'm saying here is that I think it's been highly suppressed. About and the video also talks about the women being portrayed passively in Islamic societies, and that's part of this problematic in its own right. And we over portray sometimes the issues of patriarchy, and there's a whole reason why we do that. But gender oppression, really, I should say. But so here. You see this magnificent, and we don't. I think the images of these great mosques in these Islamic societies don't really make it into, for the most part, into Western media sources as far as like places that are to visit, or grand architectural achievements around the world, great wonders around the world. I think maybe a lot of Westerners, Americans in particular, kind of remain unaware of it due to this just general suppression, because it's just the notion again is that it would be we're supposed to be the ones that are sort of our civilization and democracy is so light years ahead of these other countries, and if we consider them backward, that gives us all this sort of the illusion of a right to intervene and be hegemonic towards these countries. Really, that this next one is the Taj Mahal, and this is the one that I think a lot of us have seen. But this is actually, I have been to this one in India, and I will say that I was not thinking it was going to be that terrific, just because I kind of thought maybe it's going to be overrated or whatever. But I turned around the corner, and you see it just doesn't look that huge. But when I walked through and I saw it, and it was a very clear sky, just like it is portrayed in the day I was there, very hot day. I saw it when I first saw it. I laid my eyes on it. I was just totally astounded, blown away by its beauty and its sheer, again, magnitude. You see the symmetry in the pool, just incredible. And so again, we ask ourselves, what does it kind of suggest about the nature of Islam, and what it means to be a Muslim, and the nature of the divine within Islam. And again, you have the dome there. The dome is representing kind of like a vault of heaven in Islamic architecture, to inspire this kind of a foreshadow or prefigure what it would be to be in heaven. And again, that's kind of this that what God can promise us to the believers, and for those who act righteously in their lives, they have so that to look forward to, you might say. And the minarets on the right and the left, they wouldn't be a lot of times in a mosque you have what's called a muezzin, who would call the adhan, which is the call to prayer, and saying, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, and then saying this, repeating this, and that lets everyone know to come to the mosque, and it's time to do the one of the prayers, to perform one of the prayer times. And this is, it's not, I'm just saying it's not actually at this one, because this is more of a heritage site and a tourist site, and it's also huge. So, but just to point out that on the minarets, that's one of the functions of it. And again, like I said, the incredible symmetry, and then you have a river. There's a big river behind here that actually is kind of polluted. But okay, so this next one. This is the one that we saw on the title slide, and it's just, again, so incredible. If you look close, you see the little specks of people, and then you get a sense of just how enormous, colossal and magnificent this site is in Abu Dhabi, in the United Arab Emirates. So yeah, just I think, again, I kind of said most of what, but just to ask that question of like, what does it inspire in you to see this? Is maybe, is there a sense of like the smallness of a human being compared to the divine, or do maybe one can feel, especially if they're kind of here physically, looking at how imposing this is, that they might feel overwhelmed, or that that's like, that one might fear God. One might fear that this great authority over oneself makes oneself just feel so small and maybe even helpless, you might say. But I don't think, most Muslims wouldn't perceive it like that. But I'm just trying to invite you to whatever you might feel in relation to this. Yeah, and again, I think it's a sense of just utter wonder that it really creates. And then this next one is this Salimiyeh. I'm not sure how you actually pronounce this, Salimiyeh Mosque. I'm not sure if this is actually just how popular this mosque is, but it's also in Turkey. And then you see that I wanted to show you each of the prayer rugs. That this is where you would do people would come, and then this is where they would be lined up facing towards Mecca, which is, if you're in Turkey, more to the southeast. In the U.S., it's always to the east, where you would have the mihrab, or the niche inside the mosque. In the Arabic, it's called a masjid, is the mosque. And then, so, for instance, during Friday afternoon prayers, everyone would come in, and be this whole interior of this mosque would be filled with Muslims, and they would be doing their prayers. So yeah, again, you see just the intricacy inside as well, inside the mosque. Okay, so this next one, this next slide, now that we've kind of done that exercise, is just a representation of the global Muslim diaspora. So you see where are the countries that are predominantly Islamic. So you have in the North Africa. So you have sub-Saharan Africa in the south, and then in the north, where it is mostly desert, you have all those countries up there: Egypt, Tunisia, Morocco, and Libya, a bunch of countries that Algeria, that are predominantly Muslim. And then the Middle East, you have Saudi Arabia, and all the way up to Turkey, and then all the over to the east, Pakistan, Afghanistan, etc. So these are all predominantly Islamic countries, as many of you know. And then Indonesia actually has the highest population of Muslims, and if you can see all the way to the right, or all the way to to the east. I just so you see kind of this grand picture of where really all the Muslims are living, and the term for the global community is called Ummah. So there's the global diaspora of believers, and there is, of course, Shia and Sunni, as well as individual subsects of different Muslims, but the global community of believers is called Ummah. And then, so let's just continue here to talk about, kind of get into this more specifics of Islam. Naturally, you can't talk about Islam without talking about it's the founder, which isn't quite a precise term, but this is referring to the Prophet Muhammad. And you see the PBUH. This is peace be upon him. So this is like you'll see oftentimes in kind of parentheses next to the name, Prophet Muhammad, or in speech, Muslims will say this, just as a way of kind of showing respect to the Prophet, who is this exemplary human being, and is really the kind of the ideal Muslim, and of course, is responsible for receiving all the revelations from God. So that, incredibly important figure within Islam. Um, so let's talk about him a little bit here. So okay, so yeah, he was born in 570 of the Common Era um, in what is today Saudi Arabia, so the Arabian Peninsula. He was from this clan called the Quraysh, this a larger like tribe almost, you might say. He was actually from the Hashim clan, which is the other smaller clan. Um, Clan is maybe not the best word for this, but that's what I put. So the Quraysh they were wealthy. They were in charge of, at the time Mecca was already had the Kaaba, and so it was still a pilgrimage site at the time of Muhammad's birth, or as early as the time of Muhammad's birth, and so people would um, pilgrims would come from all over the place it is a polytheistic context to worship different deities at this big shrine. And and so the Quraysh were actually local to this area, and they were in charge for like hospitality and the water rights. So they would receive these guests, and because they were in charge of this water in this desert, they were able to become wealthy through this sort of this niche trade, this niche vocation that they had. Um, and so they were very powerful within as a kind of political contingent within the city of Mecca. Um, and then, so give the quick overview of his life. He died in 632 CE, Muhammad, that is to say. Um, and then that was in the city of Medina, which at the time of his birth was actually called Yathrib. Um, and then later it gets named Medina, which means the city. It was the city of the prophet, but Medina is just the city. So it's a shortened version of that. So Muhammad was a messenger of Allah, which is Arabic word for God. Um, and then, but so he's the important thing here is this doctrine of the seal of the prophet. This belief that there's been throughout humanity all of these prophets and messengers, but many more prophets than there have been messengers. But Muhammad is the bringing this most complete and the last like revelation of God. So it's the authoritative revelation, and that's called seal of the prophet. And so um, yes, the word for that is Rasul, is a messenger. And so you have, again, it recognizes that Moses, Jesus called Isa, Moses called Musa in Islam. Mary is venerated within Islam. Um, and all these different, going back to Abraham, and Adam and Eve. So all of these people are recognized as prophets. So we see here that that traces life. So yeah, I just give a very just the very the most general points here, but so yeah, he was on this you see on the bottom right. He as he grew in his life. So he was. Let me back up. He was um, when his dad died when his mother was in pregnancy with him, and then his mother died soon thereafter. He was left to his grandfather, and his grandfather also passed. So he was, became an orphan at that time. But then he was um, taken in by his uncle trade, um, and so um, he eventually became trader for this other wealthy woman whose name is Khadija. And Khadija was 15 years his senior, and eventually they married. So this was Muhammad's first wife, was this a wealthy trader who was actually really critical to the development of his own life and the development of Islam. When he received these revelations, she believed him, and they just had a incredible relationship by all accounts. Um, so um, yeah, so eventually, there's a lot of things that we could say. The textbook covers it. I don't want to dwell too much on it. Um, but eventually, he gets in trouble with the Quraysh because he has these revelations, and he was known to be kind of this contemplative figure that he would go to the mountain and pray. And when he turns um, later in his life, when he turns age 40, he's out in this mountain praying, and um, on Mount Hira, and then all of a sudden the angel Gabriel, which is known as Jabril in the Islamic tradition, appears, and Muhammad is shocked. He feels all this like really heavy weight, like crushing down on him, and hears this like Ikra, like recite in the name of your Lord. Um, and then this is like all of a sudden this is the first revelation occurs, and then this is the first of many revelations that he would receive over the next years and onward. Um, and Many of them in the beginning were surahs, or they became chapters of the Quran, um, but they were prophecies or revelations that were like in the beginning shorter in nature, and more religious and existential nature, and then later in his life. It wasn't always through an angel. Sometimes it was just directly that he would receive a revelation um, from God, and then later it would be like longer revelations, and it would stipulate um, how the society was to be run, what are the ethics, what are the laws, um, and then what are like all these, just basically all these little questions were answered in terms of like formulating this ideal Muslim society, and um, and so um, yeah, that gets that's his role as sort of this God's messenger, and then all of these prophecies get recorded into the Quran. Um, and then in the so in the this is a major event in his life, the Isra. This is called the night journey. So according to tradition, when he was still in Mecca, um, living in Mecca, and before he migrated, so this is called the Hijra, migrated to Medina later to flee the persecution of the Quraysh. While he was still in Mecca, um, he was taken by this angel. Um, Sometimes it's understood to be Gabriel, sometimes it's understood to be Mikael, um, but through on this accompanied with this called Barak, this like Barak, this like steed, this like horse figure that has wings, and it's taken in like a magical or divine, kind of divine, like angelic figure in his own right. This steed, and then rides upon the steed all the way from what's in the Quran. It says the furthest mosque. It's understood to be in Jerusalem. So this temple, basically the temple of the Israelites that was in Jerusalem, or the site of where it had been. It was destroyed already at this time. And so this becomes the Dome of the Rock. But he goes there, or what is called Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. He goes there and where the Temple Mount is. The Temple Mount is. He has this ascent called the Miraj, in ascent into heaven, and so he sees all of the prophets in heaven. Sees Abraham, Jesus, um, and Moses, and eventually approaches the throne of God. And It's significant because as the story goes, he's actually working out. This is one of the things, is that he's working out how many times Muslims are to pray. And at first, God had a really high number. I think it was initially 50 that God wanted Muslims to pray. And and this is a story that that Muslim comes that the Prophet Muhammad comes down, and is talking to um, Moses, and Moses is saying, that's not going to work. You're not going to be able to. I've been in the business of trying to get people to follow the Ten Commandments and pray. and it's not gonna, you're underestimating how just maybe the average person is not going to do this, and so it ends up becoming this kind of bartering thing where he goes back, 25 and 10, and then eventually settling on 5 for how many times that Muslims are to pray each day. But the larger point is that this is then so this is kind of, visiting the throne of God. It gives him even greater kind of authority and confidence as this prophet of Islam. And then so he turns to Mecca after that, and then with the migration, goes to Medina and is able to escape. The Quraysh, their economic and political influence and authority is being challenged directly by Muhammad, and who's calling them out for their immoral behaviors, for their corruption, and for the way that they're behaving, and for a variety of things, polytheism, and just not taking care of the least within this society. And so they um, so he has to escape, and then Medina is able to convert a bunch of people in Medina, and many who were with him in Mecca. Many of the first Muslims also traveled up and then joined Muhammad in Medina, and then there were actually battles between Medina and Mecca. And miraculously, the Muslims in Medina won the first one, and then it went back and forth, and eventually, years later, when Medina had grown and accepted a bunch of converts, that they were all of a sudden had the numerical strength and military strength, and so they were able to, Muhammad and his people, go down and conquer Mecca, the center of Islam. But Mecca became the site of a yearly pilgrimage. So that kind of shows the origins of the Hajj. And so it wasn't, instead of all the different, the idols of the different deities of the polytheistic pre-Islamic deities, um, um, it was just that this is just dedicated to Allah, God, one God. So yeah, this is now that's reconsecrated as that. I included this quote from Prophet Muhammad, and peace be upon him, up in the right. This notion of jihad is a very loaded term, and it is addressed in the video, and so mostly it means like the jihad means like a struggle, and a struggle to live by God's like law, Sharia, a struggle to be righteous, to fight the evil inclination that we see in society, even within oneself. And it's like this. So this notion of jihad is very similar, actually, to the notion of Israel within, Judaism, where it's like to wrestle with God, and that's what it means to, a core aspect of being Jewish is to strive to live this ethical holiness, and you have to, be a lot of attention to one's life and how they're behaving. So here we see jihad is it's called the lesser jihad and the greater jihad. Greater jihad is the notion of like confronting basically one's own demons and one's ego, and fighting to be a righteous person, and look out for those who need help within society, and taking care of the beggars and orphans, and looking out for just all of these things. And the lesser jihad is known, like is known as like, okay, well, the Quran does give permission if Islam or a person is under attack to defend oneself or defend Islam. So that is that's like the lesser jihad. But it's very clear that God does not love the oppressor. That's like a direct quote from the Quran. So it's like you only can bear arms if you're attacked, or defend oneself if you're directly attacked. and of course there's different understandings of what that can mean exactly. So it's a controversial idea, but anyway, yeah. This is, by the way, this is a piece of art down here by Nicholas Roerich, I guess you say his name. I just thought it's really powerful. You see this contemplative scene that to imagine what Muhammad up there in the wilderness may have seen when he had his first revelation. And so, yeah, let's talk a little bit about the Quran. To go to this next slide. This means a word that means recitation or reciting. And so this is the main source, the most authoritative source for determining a Muslim's life, their faith, and just the various beliefs that one would have, and Muslims have. And then the second is the hadith, which are like sayings of the Prophet, which is a little bit, it's more than that. It's like all of the stories as well, just how he behaved. And so you have all these different sources. It's actually it's really interesting. It's called isnad, this chain of, there's called strong hadith and weak hadith based on just how likely it was that this actually happened, that the Muhammad had actually said this, and all these the sources are kind of cross-checked with each other, and so that's why you get this notion of like it's very, very likely that Muhammad actually said this. And then some have a little less confidence placed in them. But the hadith again are, so these are when there's maybe something unclear in the Quran, it then goes to how did Muhammad behave, and then that's used as kind of the precedent or the example that the Muslims will then strive to replicate in their lives. And then so scholars will work out, from the Quran and the hadith together about which, between those two, that usually provides a plenty of fodder for determining how Muslims are to behave, and in all spheres and dimensions of life. So yeah, in the Quran, in that one reading, we explored the approaching the Quran introduction. The first 13 pages, it really gets into some of the nature of the Quran, particularly what's called inimitable, like it's impossible to replicate. So in pre-Islamic Arabia, there was all these great poets, very rich in a well-established, time-honored tradition surrounding poetry. And this was one of Muhammad's challenges to everyone is, see if there's anything that you can get on anywhere near the level of the poetry that's coming from the divine, not coming from him. It was just going, he was just receiving these revelations. And so that's something that it does not come through. That's really important. Does not come through really in these other languages. It can in some ways, but the beauty and this kind of otherworldly source that the Quran presents in all of these revelations, Muslims will say it comes through Arabic. It's only the Quran if it's in Arabic, and so that's where this notion of reciting the Quran is this really rich tradition within Islamic societies, and then all the prayers are said in Arabic as well. So yeah, it has 114 surahs. Just important to note that all the shorter surahs come from Mecca and are more focused on religious, existential, philosophical issues, and they're kind of the length that could be memorized. And then the longer surahs are more discussing all these different political and legal issues, sometimes it was unclear about how to behave, and Muhammad would then receive another revelation which clarified how the community was to behave. And so these are really long surahs. There's many Muslims have the entire Quran memorized. I wouldn't say anywhere close to a majority, but there are like competitions around this, and even kids at a young age have memorized the entirety of the Quran, which is pretty remarkable, really, if you think about it. So you see, this is a copy of the Quran itself in the book form, and you see just the kind of the how it's displayed there and treated with reverence. The Quran wouldn't be placed on the floor. It's treated with care. You have to actually, to touch the Quran, you have to be in a state of ritual purity. So it's similar to what it's called ritual ablutions so you're washing your hands and your face, and you're getting in the state of yeah, like ritual purity that you can actually touch the Quran, or in the case of Salat, begin your prayers. Um, and then yeah, I think there's a lot more that we could say about this, but let's just move on at this point. Um, so yeah, then I do want to show the first surah, called the opening, or the Fatiha. Um, in the name of God, the gracious, the merciful. Praise be to God, Lord of the worlds, the most gracious, the most merciful, Master of the day of judgment. It is you who we worship, and upon you we call for help. Guide us to the straight path, the path of those who you have blessed, not of those against whom there is anger, nor of those who are misguided. So you see here God being gracious, most merciful. Again, going back to the notion of Allahu Akbar, God is the greatest. And a lot of times Muslims will say, God willing, inshallah, something will happen if God wills it, you know? And so really this notion of always recognizing, being grateful for God. And then also notice this line 4, Master of the Day of Judgment. And I just want you to consider the question, what do you suppose is the significance of this verse? Just because it kind of, arguably stands apart from the others. What might it inspire in the minds of hearts of Muslims, both theologically as well as practically? So I invite you to spend a minute to kind of think about that. What do you think it kind of could mean in terms of thinking about God, or thinking about just like what kind of impact might it have upon a Muslim, considering this is a really the most important surah or chapter in the Quran. And so you can just, I think, as one suggestion, this can be answered in many ways. You can think of it as, God is even behind this day of judgment, sees all, everyone is accountable to God. And so it's, again, this notion of God as the kind of the divine, fulfilling all these roles, the divine creator, judge, author of all, this infinite source of all in the world, and just all of the greatness must be given to God. And then you have practically, this is where I want to suggest that the taqwa comes into play. So thinking about the day of judgment, that as one lives their lives, the notion is actually that there's angels that record every action, and that so nothing is going to escape this reckoning eventually. And so what does that inspire? Maybe that inspires really upright, righteous action, and not just the negative sense of avoiding sin or avoiding immorality, but also on top of that, actively looking out for those who may need it, showing compassion, showing mercy in the world, showing love for one's brothers and sisters within society and across the globe. All of these things are really important. Okay, then you just see the Arabic on the left, and again, this is like Hebrew, that goes from right to left. And then I want to just show you this. This is so ayat are like signs of God's, of inimitable handiwork of God. So it's like Muslims have a sense of seeing the natural world, seeing the day and the dawn and the beauty of the sunset, and then it becomes night and day and night and day. All of these things, like and looking at the stars, looking at the oceans, what humanity can, like again, those mosques. There's a sense that the signs are of God's presence and authorship of the world are everywhere. If we just kind of open our eyes and are open to that, seeing that would be kind of the view here. And so here, we see this is actually a waterfall in Indonesia, and it's just incredible beauty of that. You can just see it's some magical, it's amazing inspiration behind it. And then the cosmos, like you see this galaxy and the planets, so like just all the wonder that creates in the mind. Um, and and then here, yeah, we see actually a quote from the Quran, or a verse from the Quran. Indeed, within the heavens and the earth are signs for the believers. Um, I'm bringing this up in particular in relation to the Quran, because a verse in the Quran is also called an ayah, or in plural ayat. So these are every verse in the Quran. When you hear it, it evokes in the mind of Muslim that this is another sign or testimony that this is coming from a divine source. So it is indeed revelation. It's self-evident, when you hear it. And so that's a really important notion about understanding the Quran, is that it's kind of likened to these this, like when you behold your eyes on something that's almost like truly otherworldly, and you can feel it. So this is just I wanted to kind of bring that point up. I don't want to spend too much just because of the coverage that is given in the textbook. And we could spend too much time if we go through everything here meticulously. But I do want to say, so the first two pillars are so important, again, for getting back to this notion of taqwa. And so that's another thing, thinking about Day of Judgment, that it creates taqwa, this sense of piety and awareness that one should behave, because there's Almighty is watching, and so one should really behave righteously, knowing that, and kind of live up to that divine standard. So the shahada, the belief that in God being one, and that Muhammad is a prophet, and just affirming this in one's faith, and so to convert into Islam, you need to recite this shahada, and also have a witness around. And so this is, again, I think this really illustrates this notion that God awareness is taqwa. Actually, I want to share this quote from this. This is from Amina Wadud. She's mentioned in the chapter, by the way. This is from the book A Quran and Woman, rereading the sacred text from a woman's perspective. It's a really great book. And so she talks about taqwa. And again, it's kind of left out for some reason. The textbook doesn't. It kind of brings up this theme, but it doesn't name it as taqwa. So she says about taqwa, this term taqwa, one of the most essential in the Quranic Weltanschauung, which is like a worldview, has various translations and definitions. For this research, I will consider it to mean piety. That is, a pious manner of behavior which observes constraints appropriate to a social moral system. And she puts this in quotes, consciousness of Allah. Consciousness of Allah. That is, observing that manner of behavior because of one's reverence towards Allah. In the Quranic Weltanschauung, this term always reflects both the action and the attitude. So this really clues us into what this, again, that's multivalent, has kind of these different connotations. But I just bring it up because having met a lot of, I'm sure many of you have as well, talking to many different Muslims that you come across, it's like this kind of this characteristic or virtue that you often do see, this like great humility, piety, faithfulness, like a sense of righteousness, and that inspires upright behavior. And so again, this is something that I want to connect to this next point of salat, all the prayer times the daily prayers that occur. And so by doing this as a Muslim, bowing your head and acknowledging presence of God, and bringing gratitude through one's prayers, that is also something that just generates taqwa, this almost energy, this virtue. The taqwa is really, amassed when one does this, not just like one day or a week or a month, like month after month, year after year, again and again and again and again. It generates this humility and this piety. Um, yeah, it's just again connecting back to what I wanted to make sure was a theme in this lecture. Um, and then you have a som. This is how this is pronounced, som, and this is referring specifically to Ramadan. So abstaining from drink and food during the light of the day during this holy month. Um, and we did see including water. Um, and we did see in the text notion that it produces solidarity also with the poor. So it makes a person more charitable and compassionate because one is going to be hungry during the daylight hours, and that brings one into the same kind of reality as those who are homeless or poor that cannot afford to eat regularly. Um, so that's another dimension here. A lot of times during this holy month of Ramadan, a Muslim will go through and recite the entire of the Quran in its entirety. Um, and then there's a feast at the end of the month. Um, the As far as zakat goes, this is the 2.5% of tax of income that is given to the needy over the once a year. And then one also can give what's called sadaqah. The extra charity is very much encouraged within Islamic societies. Um, and there's a famous theologian and mystic named Al-Ghazali, who had an opinion or had a teaching that was like illustrative, I think, of a Muslim's attitude towards money a lot of the time, which is that money it belongs really to God. It belongs to everyone, and no, you have to give it to others. It's not like the money that we in a capitalist society. Of course, we think that it's my money. I own it. I've worked hard for it, and et cetera, et cetera. But it's important to consider that you know everyone deserves to eat and have access to all of the great things in society, like educate, all of these things. And so shelter, and so he basically he had a teaching where it's like when he gave charity, he never thought of it as him giving money. It wasn't his money in the first place. It would, there's no such thing as owning money. It belongs to, absolutely belongs to charity. And so he would also have kind of these techniques for, when you give charity to someone who's in need, you do it with a posture of total sincerity and humility, and that it's totally wrong to do it at any sort of level of feeling pride or whatever. So this is just another. I think it does illustrate kind of the ideal attitude towards money, that you can't make an idol of it. And by the way, idolatry is considered, called shirk, is considered a great sin within Islam. And then lastly, you have the Hajj pilgrimage. As already discussed, the pilgrimage that one would go once in a lifetime to Mecca. And I think the most recent I checked was had at one time in this mosque and the surrounding area 2 million people. So it's one of the biggest gatherings of religious people in the world, or adherents. There's also a major one within Hinduism known as the Kumbh Mela, that has even more adherents actually show up at the confluence of rivers, and it's its own thing. But yeah, so but yeah, incredible amount of people go take the Hajj. And then let's see, to move on. Just you see all the all the people praying in this great mosque, and the bowing of the heads, touching the heads to the ground when they're praying, and it's just to give you the prayer times that are required. There's two other ones that are supererogatory, that are extra, and um, but these are the main five. And then the notion of the midday. It's important that this is actually um, after just right after the zenith, or the when the sun is at the highest. You uh, you can't do it when it's at the very highest, because it's like that would suggest that it's like one is worshiping the sun when it's at its highest. Is what sun worshippers had used to had done, um, and so it's a little bit past noon, and then you have the sunset prayers, and then Isha just has to be done out sometime after sunset, and then at midnight. So here's the kind of, and then the dawn prayers before dawn. Um, okay, so let's continue. Uh, don't want to spend too much time on this, but just again, to go in a little bit more detail on the Hajj, you see it. The Kaaba is the cube figure, that's the shrine. And then on the right, this is the Mount Arafat, which is where Muslims on the second day will gather and repent of their sins, and it's also a kind of a rehearsal of the Judgment Day, and so they're repenting here, and they'll hear a sermon, and they'll pray from noon until the evening time, and it's just also this really, just as with circling the Kaaba. Really important and memorable aspect of the overall the pilgrimage. Okay, and then to move on. So yeah, in terms of afterlife, we have the Day of Judgment, Yom Adin, and then so one either is admitted into paradise, or is admitted into hell. And so this is after the Day of Judgment. Bear in mind. So in the meantime, this is so Judaism and Christianity also recognize the Day of Judgment sometime in the future, and which is totally unknown. And but in the meantime, one is in waiting, in this intermediate stage called Barzakh. So they are given a foretaste of basically, there's a lot of different traditions surrounding this, but they're given if they're destined to be going to paradise, then they would be given like a foretaste of that reality. And then if they're going to hell, that would be giving or the fire, foretaste of that reality. And Muslim funerals enact this kind of rite, but there's also a belief or a tradition around these two pair of angels that come and question a Muslim about their faith, like what faith did you believe in, who is your prophet, a series of questions that that every Muslim must answer correctly. And so in a funeral that they'll actually be that will actually be kind of enacted out by the mourners. And then so in terms of the vision, you see this kind of funny depiction of hellfire, just this little flame that I chose, because if you like Google image or whatever, like hell, Islamic hell, it's like all these like pretty graphic images show up. So I wanted to do something kind of tame, and not to frighten you all like I've been frightened by searching hellfire on Google too many times. And then in terms of the garden in paradise, I want to make this point. So this is a quote here that we have from a verse from the Quran that gives us illustrates both. It says, "Faces that day shall be blessed, contented by their endeavoring in a lofty garden." So this word translates as garden, jana, wherein they hear a no idle talk. Therein lies a flowing spring. Therein are raised couches, goblets placed, cushioned, arrayed, and carpets spread. Okay, so this everything is provided, and all this comfort. And let me just finish it. But whosoever turns away and disbelieves, God shall punish him with the greatest punishment. Okay, so that's the notion that we are accountable, and so we either go in punishment or reward. And there is, by the way, different beliefs about whether if one is goes to hell, um, if one is eventually, if that's eternal, if one eventually is let out. And so there is a notion of purgatory within Islam, which would be the temporary version of that. Although purgatory sometimes is also understood to be the time in the grave, the barzakh. So that can also be like, if one has to, kind of has sins that have accumulated, that they can answer to those and experience some punishment in the grave, and then be able to be admitted to the paradise. But it depends on different. That just different Muslims believe different things about that. Um, so I just want to make one other point here that a lot of times with the garden and paradise, you have like lush and fountains, and the Arabian desert is a place of scarcity, dryness, um, and yeah. So it's here a lot. I don't think it's any sort of mistake that the paradise is like kind of the opposite of that, where it's abundance and it's lush vegetation, and everything is provided for all this food that you would want. Um, and so that there's this kind of that everything is provided, and that as a reward for one's life and one's faith. Yeah, so I could say more about that, but let's leave it at this. So just aware of these two kind of main afterlife possibilities. And then lastly, here is Rabia of Basra. And I just want to share a little bit about her story, because she's just incredible. This saint from Basra is where modern day Iraq is. It's kind of on the coast, this town or city. And so she's from the 8th century CE, so still when Islam was pretty young in its development, but rapidly spreading at this time around the Middle East and into Africa. So she was a what's called known as a Sufi, which is like basically Islam, the mystical version of Islam, are known as Sufis, and the word is like it means there's different etymologies for it, but one of the things it implies is like wearing this like hard linen, like basically an ascetic garb that was uncomfortable to wear, and so. It also meant people of the bench was another thing it meant, which is like people that were like kind of in this contemplative state all the time, and they're just sitting there like around the mosque, the bench near a mosque, because they want to pray. And so it's, you can just kind of, intense contemplatives is one way that you can kind of understand a Sufi. And so she was very much in this kind of mold. And so she as a young girl, had in a tragedy lost her parents, and was like an orphan with her sister. And someone had like seen her and kidnapped her and sold her into slavery. And she got this like was with this kind of cruel master, and so she was like basically forced to stay inside of this house and do all of this work for this individual, and but as it so happened, her incredible faith, so she would basically stay up all night and pray, and didn't endure all of the ordeal of her slavery without any complaint whatsoever. And at night, like I said, she would engage in like ongoing intense prayer. And one night, her so-called master, I guess you could say, he saw her praying, and like it was like this halo around her, and it was like he saw how sincere it was, and she was just totally absorbed in the divine prayer, and he realized like uh-oh, I have like sir, how am I going to answer to God when I'm like I have this slave that's like this great this great mystic and this great person of incredible faith. So he got very scared about that, and so he decided actually to grant her her freedom, because he didn't want that to be like kind of on his I guess you could say rap sheet when he went to the face the Creator and answer to that. So that's how she, just through her incredible faith, she ends up being granted her freedom. And you see this has a lot of great quotes from her lifetime. So you have this quote down here: "I was born when all I once feared I could love." Kind of this reversal of like, going, first of all, she was an ascetic path, voluntary poverty and everything. And it's like to have the courage to look at the things that you most fear, and then they can like turn into love. And so kind of like going courageously, just going towards the truth, and not running from one's fears, but confronting them. Was like a hallmark of her life, and the hallmark of many Sufis, you could say, or mystics across different traditions. There's another story I wanted to share of her. So so she's like going around. There's a story of where she's going around town, and she's carrying like a torch, a lit torch, and a bucket of water. And it's like people are seeing her, and they're in this town, and they're like, "What on earth are you like? Why do you have those in your hands? Why are you carrying that?" And then there's this classic quote that you see on the right, where she says, "If I worship you for fear of hell." Excuse me. This is actually this is illustrating the same point. So, but she says, "I'm going to burn. I'm on my way to take the torch and burn down all of the paradise, all of the mansions of paradise, with this torch. Like, just set everything aflame in paradise. And I'm gonna take the bucket of water and use it to douse all of the hell, all the fire of hell." And so the reason is that so finally Muslims will actually pray to God and act righteously for its own sake, rather than for like fearing reward or punishment. It's just this like really powerful story about, like, in her mind, it's not about like, that shouldn't be the motivation to thinking about heaven or hell or paradise or hellfire. Should never be the kind of the in her view, and kind of more of a Sufi perspective. It should be about the genuinely coming from the heart, and inspiration, and very much experiencing this, and one's faith should be the dictate, should dictate how one behaves, rather than this other external kind of motivator. So there's a lot of really great stories about her and her legacy. I really encourage you to look her up, and discover some more about her. With that being said, there's a lot that we didn't get to cover here, but I just wanted to kind of bring some different points, and contextualize certain things that were brought up in the textbook. And I hope this was proved to be of some benefit for tuning into this. And thanks for tuning in, and have a great rest of your day.